We've done it! 3000 megahertz on an RTX 4090. Oh, it's crashed. Right, today is incredibly exciting because we're looking at the best of the best when it comes to RTX 4090s. In case you've been living under a rock for the last few months, this is a ridiculously expensive graphics card, but one that actually has performance that has been impressing everybody. So if you are someone that wants to spend an absolute ton on a graphics card, then clearly the 4090 is the way to go. But then that brings a whole new question. Which one should you buy? And all of them have the same sort of issue for me, and that is that they are very expensive, but also very big. They use a whole lot of power, and actually physically fitting this into anything other than a ginormous chassis is actually going to be a little bit of an impossible task. I mean, just look at this. It's bigger than the whole case. What? But what if I told you there was an RTX 4090 that was actually a bit smaller? Is this real? Is this actually smaller? And if you are after an RTX 4090, which one should you go for? Stay tuned as we answer that very question after a short word from this video's sponsor. Lexar is having a huge Black Friday sale, and there are masses of deals available. Lexar has an enormous range of memory products, from superfast PCIe SSDs to SD cards to RGB memory, perfect for next-gen gaming. So what are you waiting for? Hit the link down below to kit out your camera, gaming rig, or anything else with some rapid storage, with prices up to 60% off while stocks last. So yes, I genuinely have a very real problem because this is actually the PC I personally use every day for pretty much all of my gaming. I've been going back to my old library and playing all of my controller games on a 120Hz 4K TV, and this at the moment has an RTX 3080 Ti inside it that just about fits in. It's almost like a glove. It's in there like swimwear, and actually it works quite well. Because the thing I honestly didn't expect about any of these 4090s is that they will all run very cool and quiet. In fact, I don't really have a favorite at the moment other than the Founders Edition itself, plainly because that card is a little bit smaller than the rest. It actually has a little bit less sag because it's a little bit better built when it comes to the construction and the amount of metal inside there. And while it probably doesn't have the same level of cooling as this, it barely gets over about 60 degrees even when it's running flat out. So the question is, why do you need one of these massive oversized coolers? And is something a little bit smaller actually going to do a good enough job to the point where it's actually going to make a whole lot more sense? So this is a card from PNY. It's one of their accelerated gaming 4090s. It has all of the same features as all of the others. Clock speeds and things are going to be very similar. They're not going to be quite high out the box as something like an Asus Strix. But as we know, that doesn't necessarily matter anyway because you can just overclock it with software and usually get the same sort of results. But the first question is, how much smaller is this going to be? And already I'm a bit disappointed. I think the box got the better of me because I don't think this is actually that much smaller at all, if at all. I mean, it's over 3 slots still, over 3 slots. So it appears our ITX dream is not going to happen without having a water-cooled card. But it is definitely smaller than the Aorus Master, there's no doubt about that. And the thing is, with cards like the PNY and then maybe ones from Palette, Game Rock, those are often the ones that people don't tend to choose first. They normally go for like an Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, and there's not normally a good enough reason to do that. If they're at the same price and performance is better, I get it. But usually it's very similar between all of the cards, and especially at the moment, all of the thermal and cooling tends to be quite similar. So if it was me, I genuinely would look at getting whatever the cheapest card was and then checking reviews to make sure that they still run as you'd expect, which is exactly the whole point of this video. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are probably going to prefer the look of the PNY because it's a lot more restrained, shall we say. I do quite like the palette. I'll be honest, I actually prefer this new black version rather than the over-the-top silver that they had before. Oh God, don't drop it. If you're going to have this in a more normal orientation, you don't actually see all of the crystal on the bottom, so that wouldn't really matter anyway. Whereas with this, I don't think it matters whether it's in horizontal or vertical. It actually looks pretty good, pretty naughty, I think it's fair to say. And obviously you're not going to run into the same case limitations that you'll find with the Aorus Master. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is a bad card. It is definitely not. It's just so overbuilt and it's one of the most expensive ones you can get that the value just isn't there. Bear in mind the cooling is just overkill to the point where most people just don't need it. I'm struggling to think who would need it. I guess anyone that is just going to overclock it as much as possible. You want to get the largest amount of FPS, but it's definitely a case of diminishing returns. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll line up all of these cards in a little ring, and then we get the 2080 Ti for scale in the front, just so you can see how much things have moved on and I guess the problem we now find ourselves in. Let us remove our RTX 4090 founders though, so we can do our head-to-head here. That is the difference. Actually, the 4090 that is already massive is still smaller. But then, of course, the problem is this has a proper pass-through design, whereas this at least has 2 extra fans. So I would be okay putting this in a smaller size chassis, whereas this, if it backs onto like a bit of steel or aluminium or anything, then obviously the cooling is going to be completely compromised. This is probably a better design, but then there aren't many small cases that this will actually fit in anyway. There is one Micro ATX, very small case from Fractal. I will be doing a full build in this, and I'm hoping to use it as my personal rig. Get subscribed so you don't miss that. I think the best 4090 is going to go in there. We'll see which one will actually fit, and then we'll start a new personal rig. And it's going to be water cooled, because it went so well last time. Oh God, it's leaking, it's going everywhere, it's going everywhere. But a question for you, which one of these do you think looks the best? That is quite the spread. Let me know down in the comment section below. You can see the sizing is actually very similar, and that elusive small card is going to have to wait a little bit longer. But let us move on to performance, visuals, acoustics, thermals, by actually putting this inside our chassis. Inside our chassis, that is a very hard thing to say. I want everyone watching this video to say that out loud now, and let me know in the comments whether you were able to say it successfully. And don't lie, because I'll know. Let us begin our gaming tests with some Cyberpunk 2077. This is running at 4K max settings, so that's ray tracing, psycho. DLSS is set to automatic, so I believe this is probably set to performance. I personally prefer to use balanced, but this is probably the way everyone else has reviewed it, so let's stick with that. And at the moment, we're getting anywhere really between 80 and 90 FPS. And this is ridiculously impressive really, because Cyberpunk has always been a really difficult game to actually drive, and it's the one that you always want to have the settings turned up. I don't know about you, but if you're playing something multiplayer, you're not really so fussed about quality at all, and if you can get more FPS by turning something you can't notice down to high from ultra, that's something I'm wanting to do. And I'd like to point out that this is running without any form of DLSS frame generation. Our latency is around about 45 or so, as I just hit a car and I'm now being driven off. But you just go find DLSS frame generation, you turn it on, hit apply, and then immediately your frame rate should increase. So now we're looking at around about 125, 130 or so FPS at 4K, which is very, very impressive. And if you're wanting to play on like a 4K TV or something, then obviously this is going to give you all of the bells and whistles, your cake and eat it. But let's press on to the game that you guys have literally been waiting for, Call of Duty Warzone 2.0. The first time I have actually ever played this. If I am bad, I apologize. And this is running at 4K Extreme preset with DLSS set to the quality mode. And I'm actually very, very impressed with the FPS. I honestly thought we would see lower with Warzone 2.0. I thought the graphics would improve, but I don't know, maybe it's got more efficient as well, because we're actually getting around about 165 FPS or so. Obviously it is going to depend where and when you are in the game, but this really does go to show that if you do want to have your cake and eat it, you want a graphics card that can do all the ray tracing gubbins, but then can also play multiplayer titles at 4K as well, then clearly this is going to be an excellent card to do it. This is bad, this is bad! Is that? And I'm dead. I told you I wouldn't last long, didn't I? I told you. We'll take this opportunity though to have a closer look at clock speeds and thermals. And at the moment, it doesn't look as if we're actually getting any CPU bottlenecking, which is very good. It's around about 97% GPU load. I think it is probably going to be borderline. This is a Ryzen 7950X. So this is pretty much one below, I suppose, as good as it gets. I think the 13900K is going to be better, but obviously this is still the top of the line. And I do want to make it abundantly clear that if you are going to play at 1440p and even some games at 4K, you are going to see CPU bottlenecking even with the best of the best. It's nice that it's not happening here, but that doesn't mean that it's not a very real reality. As we saw in my earlier review, you can find all of those builds and reviews in the description down below. But in terms of clock speeds, we're hitting around about 2,715. I know we're going to be able to get much higher than that. We're aiming to get as close to 3,000 as soon as we do some overclocking a little bit later. But we're also getting around about 60 degrees or so on the GPU, which is very impressive. I mean, this was actually making quite a bit of noise in Cyberpunk. At the moment, though, it's not really making anywhere near as much. I have turned the CPU cooler down, though, because that was actually making a ton of racket and that was sort of nullifying the results. But I'm impressed actually so far. There doesn't seem to be anything out of place with this card. And in terms of availability and pricing, I'd imagine this is probably going to be one of the more enticing options. Just quickly as well, before we press on to our next title, I just wanted to actually test the full power draw of this card. I think Cyberpunk is the best way to do that. So I've just been running it for around about 5 minutes or so. We'll leave it running in the background and then we'll jump into GPU Z. Here we go. And we're currently using around about 360 watts. 360. And this could be good or bad. I mean, the positive spin is that it's way under the 450 that this card is actually rated for without overclocking, but then obviously the downside is that's still a lot, and as we know, it's very expensive to run computers and things. I mean, relatively, it's still not that expensive, but compared to what it was, it's way more expensive. And obviously don't forget that this is just the graphics card. You've also got a high-end processor, the whole rig, the monitor, but you get the idea. It's definitely going to use a lot of juice, but if you can afford this, let's be honest, it's probably not your biggest problem in the world, is it? Next game. Okay, I was meant to say next game, but this one seems to have broken. This was Forza Horizon, and we're getting 5. Oh, has it fixed itself? It might have fixed itself. It might have fixed itself, maybe. Yes? No, it has not. We did it! We're back! A restart fixed it. Don't worry, Forza will work fine. This is 4K with the new DLSS update set to quality. And as you can see, we're absolutely smashing the FPS at extreme preset, no less, at around about 150-ish FPS. Very, very impressive numbers, but we are still getting some stuttering, and I'm wondering whether it's because I'm recording or whether the new DLSS update needs some work. It was absolutely fine before. I don't know. I mean, it gets significantly worse when we open GPU Z, so maybe that's what killed it last time, but I wanted to give you some live readouts of some of the figures so you could actually see what was going on. Again, very clearly our clock speed seems to max out on this at around about 2,715, but I haven't really seen any temperature increases over about 62. Most games don't tend to use more than 12 gig of VRAM either, so this actually has 24, so you're actually arguably paying too much money because you're getting too much VRAM. I know it will come into its own later. That stuff is awful. It's a shame you can't buy like a 4090 16 gig. That was a bit cheaper because that would actually make a whole lot more sense, but there we go. Well, this is a disaster anyway, but rest assured, assuming you can get Forza to work, which I have and it worked flawlessly before, yeah, very, very strong results. So let us get this straight. In Cyberpunk, I drove straight head-on into a car and crashed. In Warzone, I died miserably as soon as the game started. And in Forza, I somehow managed to break everything. So I think that's enough for me for the time being. It's time to introduce you to the real professional. And his name is Benchmarkus. Hi, is that Benchmarkus? I need you to come in. Hello everybody, that is right, I am back, and I've realised that while 99% of you are probably well aware that Benchmarkus and PC Centric are in fact, spoiler alert, the same person, I would love to think that there's one person out there that has only just realised, and this is like a wow moment. But anyway, the benchmarks, and this is, I guess, a little bit closer than I thought. Now, I knew they would be similar, but bearing in mind, the PNY card actually has an ever so slightly lower clock than the Founders Edition and then, say, the Master Edition. I was surprised that essentially every result in this test was exactly the same. Even in Spider-Man, for instance, when run to run there is going to be a bit of variance because it's not like a built-in benchmark, it was pretty much exactly the same every single time on every single card. But if you take absolutely anything away from this video, these benchmarks, let it be known that all of the 4090s that have this different sort of cooler design are essentially all going to be the same. This isn't the same on every single type of graphics card. The RTX 3060 Ti, for instance, some of them were great, but some of the cheaper ones were really not. But on this top-end SKU, there really is no problem with going for one of the lower spec cards. If it was up to me, I'd probably go for the Founders Edition if you can get hold of it, because I think it looks the best. It suffers the least, arguably, from sag, and it's actually probably the smallest card in the test, which is saying something, bear in mind that is huge. But realistically, let it be known that no matter what SKU you go for, you're essentially going to be getting the same performance, and if you do want a little bit more, then just overclock it yourself with some software. You don't need to spend extra money to do that, and you don't need to worry about extra thermal headroom. In fact, here's a very rough cost per frame analysis. It's very difficult to do at the moment because the prices are all over the place, so I've sort of guesstimated that the Master's around about £2,000 and the rest are at RP at £1,700, which I know isn't true, but let's just go with this for now. And you can clearly see that you're paying way more for the Gigabyte card, and in terms of advantages, well, I can't really see any. unless you like the look. Let's move on to the overclocking. And to do this, I'm going to use MSI Afterburner. And it's a little bit of a shame that EVGA have stopped making cards, because does that mean their Precision X is finally going to be in the toilet? I really liked that. I was using that for ages. It was my favorite one. But Afterburner is good too. We'll open up some Cyberpunk. We'll set this to 2560 by 1600, but we will turn DLSS off. And the reason is I want this to be entirely GPU bottlenecked. So I know this isn't realistic, but this is the best way to properly see what this PC can do. And indeed, this is working, because if you look at our GPU load, we're on 98, 96%. So this means that we're not getting any CPU bottlenecking. And in terms of frame rate, we're getting about 111 FPS, and this is completely native, just above 1440p. So that itself is quite impressive. We do have DLSS frame generation on though, so bear this in mind. I'll see if we're still bottlenecked at quality. I imagine we will be. Yes, actually we are. So I think this is the highest we're gonna get. But let's actually overclock this. At the moment, we're getting 177 FPS. We will add 100 megahertz to the core clock. Usually I'd say start a little bit lower than this, but I'm pretty confident this will work. And we've jumped up already to 180, so you've got an extra 3 or 4 FPS right out the gate. Can we go any further than this without it immediately crashing? Let's go for 175. And we've gained another 2 FPS. Is this going to be stable though? I'll have a little play for around about 5 minutes or so. Obviously you'll know if your overclock isn't stable because it will crash. And this isn't something that will necessarily happen straight away. So if you're playing something like The Witcher 3 and you get into a tight situation, it's all going well and then the whole thing crashes, that's not good. And especially in multiplayer, it would be even more of a problem. So doing proper testing is essential really to make sure that everything is working properly, but this can be done over 24 hours, a week or so, and you can always adjust it on the fly. I want to see if we can hit 3000 though. Let's go for 240. Even more FPS now, I've gained another 3, so what's that, about 10 gained already? 4090 is a card that you can overclock actually, and it is worth doing. It is going to use more power potentially, but how much power? I don't even think you'll notice too much of a difference. I mean, what we're using now, 350, 344. So yeah, actually it's using about the same. No sign of any crashes yet. What are we up to? 2955. And thermals haven't increased either, by the way. We're still looking at around about 60 degrees or so. So, you know, it's more a stability issue and whether you're happy to overclock your card and potentially void your warranty. I mean, I don't really know the rules per se. I wouldn't have a problem doing it, but obviously, officially, it may void your warranty and things, but how are they gonna know? How are they gonna know? We need another 45. Can we do it? Can we do it? We've done it! 3000 megahertz on an RTX 4090. It is one of the most silly ways for manufacturers to make more money. I've seen like 4080s that are £50 more expensive for the OC version, and you won't get anywhere close to this out of the box. Oh, it's crashed. Serves me right, doesn't it? But don't pay for the overclocking version. Just do it yourself. Genuinely, if it was me, I would be looking at one of the more entry-level cards. I would probably go for something like the PNY, maybe the Palette. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it doesn't matter to me. I care more about the performance, and as I say, I think the top still looks okay. So the question very much does go out to you guys on this. Which 4090 would you buy? Which graphics card type would you buy? Do you think really expensive coolers are worth it, or do you agree with me that actually, this generation, as far as I can tell so far, it doesn't matter which one you go for because they're all very cool, all very quiet, and they all have plenty of overclocking headroom, so why pay any more? I just want a small one so it'll fit in my ITX case. Please, please, someone make it. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and obviously do get subscribed so you don't miss any future videos like this. And if you want to see our top cases video that features this somewhere in the list, you can find that in the top right corner of your screen. And as always, if you do want to learn current pricing about any of the 4090s or anything in the system, you can find it linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one.